welcome viewers. I am Pia and you're watching NewsX World's special coverage of the SCO summit in Tianjin. The 2025 Shanghai Cooperation Organization Summit is all set to open, bringing together over 20 leaders to address regional security, counter-terrorism, trade, energy, digital cooperation, food security and issues such as Belarus's membership in the organization as well. Russian President Vladimir Putin has arrived in China for a 4-day visit. He will first attend the SCO summit in Tianjin, then travel to Beijing for talks with Xi Jinping and attend a military parade marking the surrender anniversary of World War II. Also arriving for the summit are Armenian Prime Minister Nikol Pashinyan and Kyrgyz President Sadar Japarov, Vietnamese Prime Minister Pham Minh Chinh, Uzbek President Shavkat Mirziyoyev and Maldivian President Mohamed Muizzu. Muizzu, in fact, has also held a meeting with Xi Jinping in the meanwhile. Key highlights of the event is definitely going to be the bilateral meeting between the Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi and Chinese President Xi Jinping. Remember, this is the bilateral meeting that is going to be held after the one that was held earlier in Kazan at the sidelines of the BRICS summit in Russia after a border truce in October 2024. This is a crucial meeting because Modi is in China after 7 years. Despite ongoing border tensions, Prime Minister Modi's presence signals India's pragmatic approach to engage through multilateral platforms, especially at a time when the United States is imposing steep tariffs. Meanwhile, Putin's presence comes amidst the ongoing Russia-Ukraine war, adding further weight to the summit. Meanwhile, the 25th anniversary of the SCO comes at a time of sharp global conflicts and internal frictions as well, with leaders seeking to bolster energy security and digital defenses and position the Shanghai Cooperation Organization as a counterweight to Western blocs such as NATO. On that note, viewers, let's head across live to Tianjin, where my colleague and our senior executive editor, Megha Sharma, is bringing the latest updates, exclusive insights. Good morning, Megha. Thank you so much for joining us on the broadcast. What's happening on the ground? What can we expect? It's quite a power-packed day, slew of bilaterals, and then there's going to be a dinner in the evening as well.
Right, absolutely, Pia. You know, what we're getting, the latest information that we are at this point of time receiving is that the Turkish President Tayyip Erdogan has already arrived in Tianjin, so has the Armenian Prime Minister, Vietnamese Prime Minister, Kyrgyzstan President. They all have arrived today in Tianjin. They have just arrived a short while ago. We also got information that President Putin, the Russian head of state, has also landed here in Tianjin. Now, there are going to be a number of bilaterals that will take place. From the Indian side, it is going to be Prime Minister Narendra Modi who's going to be holding a bilateral with Xi Jinping. Xi Jinping yesterday, in fact, had a series of bilaterals even as these leaders started pouring in to Tianjin, including the Secretary-General António Guterres, who held that 45-minute conversation with the President of China. Alongside that, there were bilaterals that were also held between Xi Jinping as well as the Egyptian president. We had a number of bilaterals that had taken place between Xi Jinping and the Myanmarese president, the Cambodian prime minister, the Nepalese prime minister. So these bilaterals have already happened. Remember, there are 24 of these countries. 10 of them are the member states of the SCO forum. There are 14 others which are dialogue partners or have the observer status. Amongst them, key are Turkey. We also see that Qatar, UAE, Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, they all are participating at this summit. So it's a big ticket event. There are a number of countries, some of them from Southeast Asia, a few of them from the Middle East, several of them from Central Asia, who are also, of course, a big part of what the SCO summit is. who all, and a couple of countries from East Europe, which includes Russia as well as Belarus, which is now the latest entrant and part of the SCO summit. So these are the big ticket items that are scheduled to take place. Mind you, at 6:30 p.m. local time, Beijing time, is when Wang Yi is, who's the foreign minister of China, is going to be holding a press conference. And after the press conference is going to be the official reception that is going to be hosted by President Xi Jinping, who is then going to welcome in official capacity all the 24 heads of the states that are participating and international leaders of international organizations that are participating in this event.
Indeed, Megha, you've spoken about the arrivals. Vladimir Putin has just arrived in China. He's set to meet Xi Jinping as well. He'll be staying back after the summit. He'll be heading to Beijing for the 80th anniversary of the Chinese victory in World War II over Japanese forces, as the parade is set to be held on the 3rd of September. There's a bilateral meeting that is slated to be held between the two leaders as well, which comes at a time when, yes, the United States is putting a lot of pressure on Russia to end its war with Ukraine. So what can we expect on this front?
Right. It is going to be important. The two big bilaterals that everybody is eyeing is the one that is going to happen between President Putin and Xi Jinping. The other one, of course, Prime Minister Narendra Modi and Xi Jinping. There is, in fact, a third bilateral between the three RIC leaders, which is going to be happening between India and Russia. So, but besides that, in fact, there is an important meeting that will happen on the sidelines of this summit that is going to happen between President Putin and the President of Iran, Masoud Pezeshkian. Now, this is in wake of these nuclear talks and the stalemate that has happened amidst growing pressure and threats of sanctions that have been leveled by the E3 nations, which includes Britain, France, and the United Kingdom. Russia has been very vocal in its support to Iran in helping build its nuclear program, but the sentiment is not shared by the European countries or, for that matter, by United States of America. So that is going to be an important chat that is going to happen between the leaders of Iran and Russia. And in the meantime, of course, when we talk about India and Russia, it's been spoken at length about these additional 25% tariffs that have been imposed by the US administration on India for purchasing Russian oil. But Russia continues to be steadfast in its support to India, in fact, talking even about potentially providing a 5% additional discount on the crude imported by India from Russia. And there could now be opportunities that may arise of further exploration of increased trade relationship, opening up, further opening up the markets between Russia and India, and how more can, ties be further burgeoning vis-a-vis trade, vis-a-vis opening up markets, and something similar that is also going to be played out when Prime Minister Narendra Modi and President Xi Jinping hold those talks, because up until in the last 5 years, there have been markets that have been restricted, both from Chinese side as well as Indian side. There have been a number of exports from China that were restricted, particularly when we talk about fertilizers and tunnel boring machines, as well as rare earth minerals that are integral for Indian production to increase, whether it is about electric vehicles, or we talk about electronics, or even the pharmaceutical industry that is heavily reliant on the ingredients that are imported from China, which had up until now stopped, or their import had been stopped because of the Galwan clashes that had taken place back in 2020. But all these things seem to be a matter of the past, at least for the interim period, even as both countries continue to face the onslaught of the US President's tariff war that has obviously left a bad taste in India and China's mouth.
Absolutely, Megha. Thank you so much for joining us live this morning, of course, providing all these latest details as well as perspective as far as what is transpiring on the ground. Meanwhile, joining us on the broadcast is Mr. Walter Anderson. He's a political analyst from Washington, D.C. in the United States. Also with us is Mr. Sumit Ganguly, who's also a political analyst from Palo Alto in California. I'd like to go across to Mr. Anderson. It's a power-packed day, as my colleague suggested. She is on the ground in Tianjin covering the latest, but all eyes are on a very important bilateral that is slated to take place. I'm referring to the one between Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi and Xi Jinping. The leaders last met in Kazan, but Modi is visiting China after 7 years. Ties were warm and cordial up until 2019, when Xi Jinping, in fact, came down to India. He flew to Mahabalipuram in Tamil Nadu, met the Prime Minister, but somehow in 2020, everything changed with the Galwan clashes. With Trump's tariffs also now coming into the equation, and Trump's pressure upon India by imposing steep 50% tariffs now coming into the fray, are we witnessing a historic realignment?
I think it's too early to tell yet. A lot depends on what will happen. But I just have one slight correction to make on the figure you gave of 50% on the items coming from India. About a third of the exports from India are not being tariffed. Pharmaceuticals and some electronics, things that are actually critical, so they have been, overlooked. But the other things that haven't have been, very labor-intensive industries like the apparel, clothing, jewelry, etc. And I should say here, I have a personal interest in all that. My wife has a factory that exports a large part of its product to the U.S. And she's been totally busy to beat the August 27th deadline when the other 20% comes in. And I know from watching her and her business is 50% additional to a product is very difficult to handle. So I think one has, for the Indian, public, manufacturers who have to respond to that, they need to look at new markets, particularly domestic markets, as well as markets, particularly in Europe and maybe in China and Japan as well. So I think that's going to be something that has to be done, and it's going to need the help of the Indian government for them to do that, because you have hundreds of thousands of workers, who could be left off. Now, my wife is fortunate in that she has not let off any of her workers, nor does she intend to, at least in the near frame. So we'll see what happens, over the next several months. But so far, on a key issue of Indian imports of oil from Russia, so far, the U.S. and India have not backed down from mutual stands. India says it needs, to import oil, and it is relatively, competitive. The U.S. says it must stop, and I think we stand at that point. Now, there are some talks going on, behind the scenes in certain levels. But, I think something that's instructive is we do not have an ambassador. The U.S. does not have an ambassador in India. We have nominated someone, Sergio Gore, yes. Who, in fact, is, most people don't. I don't know, Shumit, do you know about this? I haven't heard the name at all. I
have not heard the name either until it was announced.
Yeah, sir. So it's only I don't think it's been formally announced, so it has been all but formally announced. But he doesn't have a background in South Asia. He's not a diplomat by background, and he's close to Trump because he was kind of a person who was able to who judged how loyal a person was to the president. That was his job in his office, was to look at people who were appointed to find out how loyal they were. So we'll see. The reaction in India, I think, has been equally stunned. Because it took everybody by surprise, and I'm sure many of the people who are listening here, he'll probably be something of an envoy, more than a typical ambassador. But that may not be bad, because countries want their ambassadors of another country, particularly important ones, to be close to the head of that state. And of course, he is close to Trump. So we'll see whether he adds, something, positive to the diplomacy between our two countries.
Absolutely. I request our guests to stay on with us. There are some crucial developments coming in. We're now learning that Chinese President Xi Jinping has met UN Secretary-General António Guterres in Tianjin ahead of the summit. Xi Jinping has stressed that multilateralism, solidarity and cooperation are the right answers to global challenges. He has stated that China will remain a trustworthy UN partner and has reaffirmed support for the UN's central role in international affairs. Marking the 80th anniversary of both the UN's founding as well as the World Anti-Fascist War victory, Xi Jinping has urged countries to uphold the UN Charter and restore the body's vitality as the main platform for global cooperation. Guterres, meanwhile, welcomed China's role, calling it a fundamental pillar of the multilateral system, and has expressed gratitude for Beijing's support. Listen in to what both leaders had to say.
欢迎你来华出席上海合作组织天津峰会。今年是世界反法西斯战争胜利和联合国成立80周年。历史启示我们，多边主义团结合作是解决全球性难题的正确答案。在联合国成立80周年之际，我们要重温联合国创立初心，重申对联合国宪章宗旨和原则的承诺。 推动联合国在新形势下重振权威和活力，成为各国协调行动、共同应对挑战的主要平台。
Thank you very much, Mr. President. I think it's important to reaffirm the values that 8 years ago led to the approval of the United Nations and the approval of the Charter, and the role of the People's Republic of China as a fundamental pillar of the multilateral system is extremely important, and we are extremely appreciative and grateful for that.
All right, we've heard what the leaders have had to say. I'd like to rope in Mr. Ganguly, who's been waiting rather patiently. The SCO's relevance has often been questioned. Now, especially in an era where we're seeing the US adopt a more protectionist stance, with the Trump administration highlighting its America First pitch that he had made initially that had brought him to power, do we see the SCO once again becoming relevant?
I think the SCO will be of limited relevance because there are significant differences amongst the members of the SCO, most notably India and China. They have temporarily papered over their differences because they are faced with what they perceive to be a common threat to their economic and trading interests, but we cannot simply set aside all the other underlying differences that exist. And furthermore, Russia, bluntly stated, is a declining power. In an ironic way, it has now become the junior partner to China. It is dependent on China to buy its oil. It is dependent on China for certain forms of high technology. It is dependent on China for defense technology. This is a complete reversal of roles from the early Cold War years, when China was decidedly the junior partner, until, of course, the Sino-Soviet split that took place in the early 1960s, and then after 1969, following the Ussuri River clashes, there was no love lost between China and the Soviet Union. So we have to bear in mind that that a convergence of interests may prove to be somewhat fleeting.
Indeed, I request you to stay on with us. We're tracking more news. We're now learning that US President Donald Trump, in a post on Truth Social, has wished Americans a happy Labor Day weekend and has stated that the USA could be heading into its best year ever if his proposed tariffs are finally approved by the courts. His remarks come even as world leaders, including Putin, Xi Jinping and Modi, are gathering at the SCO summit. Remember, yesterday a court had ruled that Trump's tariffs were illegal, but it did not put a stay on them in the meanwhile, giving the administration time to appeal in the US Supreme Court. I'd like to go across to Walton Anderson once again. What's interesting is that the summit is now coming amid the US putting a lot of pressure on Russia to end its war with Ukraine. Trump has been mooting a potential trilateral meeting to take place. Ukraine has agreed, but Kremlin, meanwhile, has been giving a rather cold response. Do you think this possible meeting can take place, or is it just will it just simply remain an idea?
I had trouble with the sound coming between you and I. It only partially came. Could you repeat your question again? I only got about half of the question.
Indeed, I had stated that the summit is coming even as US is putting a lot of pressure on Russia to end its war with Ukraine. Trump has been mooting a trilateral between Zelensky, Putin and himself. Do you think this meeting can catalyze in the near future? Because Kremlin's response up until now has been quite cold. We've seen strikes take place in Kiev as well, where civilians have been killed.
I don't see it immediately ending. For one thing, the present situation is working to Putin's advantage. So I don't see something immediately happening that will bring that to a close. It's something we have to face. Now, that's not a good thing for businesses like my wife, so other small businesses in India or businesses that sold those items that are now heavily tariffed. Because the Trump administration's argument has been that the sale of oil and the purchase by countries like India and China and a few others has in effect funded the Russians in the fight. But I think, from the criticism I've heard, and there's been a lot of public criticism by people who write in foreign affairs in the US, is that these tariffs have been applied on India somewhat unfairly, that there are other countries who are also doing it and for whom the tariffs have not been imposed as much as they have been on India. And for example, and also a choice of an ambassador. I mean, the major countries normally have an ambassador that's chosen, because the ambassador carries the weight of the president, particularly on important issues. And there is not a U.S. ambassador in India. There is an Indian ambassador in the U.S., but the other way around, it doesn't happen. And to be quite frank, it's a person that I haven't heard of. I'm sure, he is close to the president, and for some way, in some arguments, that's a good thing, that an ambassador is close to the head of state. But he comes, on issues regarding South Asia, he comes with a virtually blank sheet. People aren't aware of where he stands on these issues. So, it's going to, I totally agree with Shumit that, when you think of the relationship between US, Russia, China, India, Ukraine, there are a lot of issues that are at stake. And just because there's been a downturn in the US-India relationship doesn't mean that there is no good relationship at all. There are some areas where, in fact, we are cooperating. And there are some areas where, India's relations with China has to be carefully nuanced, because there's still differences between the two countries on a number of issues which have to be worked out. But where the difference is, and this is where people, who are writing on the issue in the US, who I respect, has said, it has, lowered some of the barriers between India and China trying to improve relations with each other. And, it has also created a point of convergence between the India and Russia as well, regarding what the US has tried to do. I think, to be quite frank, speaking as an American, I think our government has to handle this whole issue with a little more subtlety than it has now. And I'd be interested to hear Shumit's, take on this. He's written a lot about this, very brilliant stuff. I think that we have not handled it with behind closed doors, with the kind of public statements that have been made, normally have been made behind closed doors. And our president, who tends to be very upfront, has not done so. And that's created, real problems in India. It's not just India. My family is Danish. The Danes have an issue because of Greenland. where our president has said he's going to take it. And I can tell you, the Danes have been, like the Indians, have tended to be moving in a very sympathetic, attitude toward the United States. That's no longer the case, I should say. I'm not sure we've reached that point in India, though I think we have, where, many Indians are shocked at, things that are being said, like, some of the people close to the president has said that India is a dead economy, and have pointed out the various problems in Indian society, and which all countries have problems in society, but normally, senior figures haven't sort of talked about it publicly in the way that has happened here. And I think hopefully, there'll be opportunities. The UN is about to sort of meet in New York, and Modi will come. I'm curious if he and our president will meet, given the bad will that has cropped up between the two. At least the president has spoken quite negatively in many ways about India, and in some ways the prime minister. The prime minister has been very cautious, and I must say, he's been very careful and what he has said. But that doesn't mean he's not doing things to respond for the interests of India. He has, and he's continuing to do so. Though I think he needs to do more, because the 25% increase in tariffs in India, for example, is going to have an effect on a lot of small businesses, and these businesses that were impacted are high employment businesses. You're going to have hundreds of thousands of people potentially out of work in the country. Now, fortunately, in my wife's factory, she hasn't had to lay off people, but she has had to do some things like looking for alternative markets for her product, and that's not a good thing to happen. In fact, I'd be curious to hear Professor Ganguly's reaction to all of this.
Absolutely. Roping in Professor Ganguly, the interesting thing is that a lot of critics of Donald Trump and his recent actions point towards the fact that it's taken 25 years of bipartisan effort, including Trump himself in his first term, to bring India-America ties to where they are currently, where they were at least just a couple of months back. We referred to the Quad in particular as a point where we've seen both countries converge as far as maintaining the free and open nature of the Indo-Pacific is concerned. Japan and Australia have recently come out and reaffirmed their support for Quad, but the US so far has remained mum. It's interesting now that there are reports coming in from American publications such as the New York Times that somehow Trump might not make it to the Quad summit this year. Nothing has been confirmed by the White House officially. These are just murmurs going around. So how does it augur for ties in the long run?
Well, we don't know about the long run because Trump has a habit of changing his mind at fairly short notice. So matters could very easily change in the next 6 months, or perhaps even earlier. One doesn't really quite know. So if I hesitate to say anything firm about the long run. However, what I will underscore, and something Walter has hinted at already, is that the relationship is on a fairly sound basis today. There are there's a substantial Indian American population in this country, close to 5 million, which is about 1.6% of the total population of the United States. They pay close to 6% of the total taxes in the United States. And so it is an influential community. Second, the US and India have been pursuing defense ties significantly for the last 20 or so years. India has diversified its weapons acquisitions and has bought a number of critical technologies from the United States. Indian companies are manufacturing components for American firms in India. So unlike in the Cold War, when there was hardly any relationship worth the name, today the relationship has considerable ballast. So while we are certainly in the doldrums right now, I would not like to assume that these the lack of wind in the sails at the moment is a sign that the entire relationship is about to crash on the rocks. I think that is highly unlikely today. And furthermore, I am old enough to know that I lived through the 1971 war when matters were at a really low ebb. And the language that Henry Kissinger and Richard Nixon used to describe Prime Minister Gandhi and Indians is really unprintable and unsuitable for a show like this. We haven't gone there, and God willing, we will not. Yes, Mr. Trump has made some intemperate statements, some statements which I think are most unfortunate and undesirable. And the notion that the Indian economy is a dead economy is, bluntly put, laughable, given that in the last quarter, the economy grew at 7.8%. If this is a dead economy, give me one any day of the week.
All right. With that, I'd like to thank you, Professor Ganguly, and I'd also like to thank Mr. Walter Anderson for taking out time, speaking to us on NewsX World this morning as we track crucial developments from Tianjin. But due to paucity of time, we must wrap up this bulletin here. More news and updates on the other side. Stay tuned on NewsX World.